I guess I just think that comics is the ultimate art form, and it's a way to interact.
Lounging, son.
So welcome to the Comic Lounge. Today I have one of the most badass editors in the business, Shelly Bond, with me.
Wow. That is like a supreme introduction. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for being here.
Wow. Well, it's great to finally meet you. I know we've been communicating for a few years because you're one of the most loyal, badass Black Crown fans.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, of course. So before we get into everything, you know, like we were talking about right before we started recording, I think it's very important for people to not just follow creators, but follow the editors that help curate projects, the people that corral the talent and get the best out of the talent that you can. Can you talk a little bit about what an editor's job is in comics?
Absolutely. Well, you just used a terrific word. You said corralling. And you also said curating. And those are two C words that are 100% appropriate to defining what an editor does. But wow, what doesn't an editor do? When I first started in comics, I didn't even know you could grow up to become a comic book editor. It was a fascinating idea in theory to me. And I think that since 1988, when I got my first job, the definition of a comic book editor has changed dramatically because it's really what you make of it as the person in charge. You know, it's being master control. So basically, when you open up a comic book and if you like the cover art and you like the logo design and you start reading it and you can't stop because the writing is rich and original and inventive and the art is frenetic and beautiful and the coloring is intense but not over rendered and the lettering reads beautifully on site and doesn't need a lot of kerning or balloon fixes, see the editor's name in the credit, because the editor is responsible for absolutely everything that you are enjoying or that you despise in a comic book. Because when the going is good and you like what you're reading, the editor should stand up and take a bow. But if there's something that you can't stand, if there's a mistake, if there's a double page spread that gets busted up, like has happened in the old days, where suddenly you're not looking at something that is complete, that an ad was put on a page accidentally, see the editor in the credits, because that's the editor's fault. So the editor really has a lot on his, her, or their shoulders, but it's the greatest job on the planet. And I feel like I was born to edit comics, and no one's going to stop me.
Since we last talked, you've been pretty busy. I mean, you've done the anthologies like Femme, Magnifique, Hey Amateur, which I loved, and you recently wrapped up another anthology. Awesome.
Sorry, just this little thing I had hanging around the studio.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. The packaging was amazing. But you just wrapped up Insider Art. Could you talk a little bit about that project?
Wow, I would love to. That project, I think, was one of the most gratifying projects that I've done in my 30 years in comics. And that's saying a lot. Because I know you're a Vertigo fan, so I'm sure you remember a series called Femme, which I worked on starting with issue 46. I did not have the pleasure of starting that series. I was still in college when Sandman launched. But I had the supreme pleasure of working with Neil Gaiman and many, many artists from issue 46 to 75, and then, of course, Sandman Overture. But of all the projects I've concocted and all the cats I've herded, there are no cooler cats than the ones you'll find in Insider Art. And that book is a compendium of comics, crafts, and games and cats. And what's so amazing about it is that it's 270 pages. It's for all ages. I did not do it myself. I can't lie. I called 7 other editors and I said, look, we're living through nasty times. Let's put our heads together. Let's combat the vitriol on the Twitterverse. All the people in the comic book industry are negative, and rightly so. We're all experiencing things we never thought we'd live through, things that we only actually read about in our comic books and our science fiction books. So I said, look, let's put together an anthology. Let's take care of our own, because female and non-binary comic book retailers are few, but they're important and they're badass and they need our help. So I wanted to give back, and I wanted to give back with my skills. And so that's sort of where it started. I thought we could take the next few months and all just hide under our beds and just suffer all the anxiety and the tension and the horror that I knew was coming for all of us. Or we can pivot and we can reach out to the female and non-binary creators around the world and contribute to the greater good by coming up with an anthology that was even more astounding and exuberant than I could have imagined back when it started. So yeah, 142 artists and writers, letterers, colorists, editors got together, and in under 3 months, we created Insider Art, which, by the way, is available on Gumroad.
Nice.
You can see this. For a suggested donation of $10, you get this instantly. It's a digital anthology, and eventually I'd like to make a print edition. I think I have kind of some high art standards, to say the least. So I would love to not only do a hardcover, not unlike Hey Amateur, with a satin ribbon, a spot varnish cover, but I also want to do like one of those big, fat, almost manga-like omnibuy collections, so that kids can take it to camp next summer, presuming that there is camp for kids to go to, for parents to have as a special treat when their kids are sick home from school. The beauty of it is that everything about it is set inside a house. And so, for instance, we have 8 different rooms, 8 different editors. We've got a craft room, which is edited by Sophie Dodgson. So Sophie went out of her way to procure crafts and games and things to make and do from objects that you had around the house. Because we're out in LA, but like all over the world, there are different limitations on how many times you can actually leave your house or your apartment. And that sort of, limits what you can make. Anyone that's curious about the crafts in this book, there are things that you can make from everyday objects or things in your fridge, which actually we've got quite a few things in the kitchen, recipes from editor Chris Simon corralled and put into the compendium. So,
nice.
There's tons of stuff to do. I edited the garage, and one of the highlights was reaching out to Vida Ayala, and they pitched me a game board. So they have a game called Garageland It's Alive, and Sally Cantorino and Gab Contreras were the artist and colorist. And so in the book, I know it's digital, but we have it so that there's a link on our website at insiderart.net, where you can actually download the game board and the adorable pieces that Sally drew. So you can actually print, cut, paste, and create your own physical game board to play this game, which by the way, Vita pitched as it's part Little Shop of Horrors and part Candyland.
Oh, I love it.
Right?
That's awesome. Yeah.
That. I'll just run through a couple of other things if you don't mind.
Yeah, please. I would love to hear about all of it.
Yes. So I wanted, like all anthologies that I've worked on, and I know you've noticed because you've supported a lot of them. So I salute you. Thank you. The best anthologies have a conceit that makes them stand apart from every other. So I wanted to have a through line that was tight enough that there was cohesion. So I came up with the idea of insider art because I always loved the term outsider art. And I don't think a lot of people know what it means exactly. And so I thought, wow, let's do this. Let's make it all ages. Let's educate the readers too, because my favorite comics are the ones where I not only learn a lot about a particular subject, but I learn a lot about the writer, and I learned a lot about the human condition, and I learned a hell of a lot about art just from working with so many amazing writers and artists over the years. So I think part of the educational side of insider art is that I think you're going to pick up a lot of new talents just from every single section. So for instance, we've got the bedroom, and it's all ages. So by the way, if anyone's listening to this and they have a young child, this is perfect for everyone. there's something in it for a very young child who, a toddler maybe. In the living room, we've got a section called busy boxes. So you might have just like an empty TV box, and we will show you how to turn that into your own personal little art den for your child, with markers and again, everyday objects. So each section has something for everyone. The bedroom starts us off. Chrissy Williams is a British editor who you might be familiar with from The Wicked and the Divine. She's terrific. She actually brought a lot of British writers and artists into the mix, and she's a poet. So she also wrote this adorable poem called The Beast, which is illustrated by Kate Brown. And she also brought in some crafts into her section and some short stories. We have a great short story that's illustrated by Stephanie Hans. And
Oh, man.
She's great, right?
Yeah, I love her art.
And a manga piece by Emma Vicelli, and a piece about dancing around the house by Katie West and Susan Sainsbury, which is wonderful. So we've got the bedroom, we've got the attic, which is curated by Mariah Huner. I'm not sure if you recognize Mariah's name.
No,
Well, Mariah, you might know, but you might not realize it, but she was my assistant editor for many years at Vertigo.
Okay.
I hired her. She was our intern. She studied at the School of Visual Arts. And when my assistant editor left, I think back in, I want to say 99, Mariah came in to show us her portfolio as she was graduating from SVA. And I was like, wow, great timing. Would you like a job? And so she said, oh my God, of course. So we worked together for 7 years, and she became not only a terrific assistant editor, and she was promoted during that time frame to an associate. She actually edited some of the Lucifer series. I want to say I edited a little bit more than half the run, perhaps through to issue 55, and I passed her the baton. So she finished out Lucifer. And she
very cool.
Yeah, it was great. She edited Mike Carey and Peter Gross and a lot of other guest artists on that series, which was wonderful. And she worked with me on Fables. So she was a big part of Fables.
Oh,
Are you a fan?
Fables. I love Fables.
I think it was the series that really put me on the map, because even Karen Berger will admit, I think that sometimes people confused us, because there was a time where we were like two of the very few women in comics that people recognized. And we both worked so well together because we were so undeniably different. There are 10 years between us, and I was the ingenue at the time when she hired me. I was a full editor at Kamiko, but when I was hired to work for Karen, the only position that was open was assistant editor. And I had to take a big step back, not in pay necessarily, but in title. And I was a little bit bothered by that. I was 26 and I really earned my chops at Kamiko. I worked with a lot of people. I worked with Bill Willingham on the Elementals. I worked with Matt Wagner. I worked with Peter Gross on Empire Lanes. And I really felt like I earned my stripes. And so I know she felt bad, and she said, look, I know you have experience, but if you prove yourself, I'm not going to hold you back. So do your thing. And she trusted me. She trusted me with her books. I was put on Shade, The Changing Man, which was my favorite comic book at the time, only next to Doom Patrol, which I didn't edit, but Grant Morrison and Richard Case's Doom Patrol was my masterclass. It made me weak in the knees, especially the guest artist issues by Philip Bond. His art, I just surrendered to comics. His art made me feel alive. And I didn't even know him at the time. And that was the book that I think Doom Patrol and Hellblazer were the two Vertigo books I read before I started working at Vertigo. I remember picking up Jamie Delano's Hellblazer at my comic shop when I was in college. And I remember picking up Love and Rockets and Grendel. And
yes. I love Love and Rockets.
Right? The best. And I remember Electra Assassin by Bill Sienkiewicz and Frank Miller. And I didn't really know from Frank Miller. It was Bill Sienkiewicz who knocked me off my platforms. I was like, wow, this art, if you can make comics that look like this, I'm in. And I couldn't write or draw. So I was editing a lot of film at that point in college and videotape. And I thought, wow, what if, maybe I can be a comic book editor, because it's about cutting and pasting. It's like it's about reassembling, and it's about putting things together and deconstructing them. So that's when I first got the idea of like, wow, can I be a part of this industry? I want in.
And I said it like you can write, you can't draw. I feel kind of the same way, but I love the industry and every aspect of it. That's why I think I follow everything: letterers, colorists, editors, associated. I follow everybody on social media because I feel like everybody plays an important part in creating this amazing industry.
Yeah. But don't feel bad about not going to school. Trust me, when I was interviewing assistants over the years, the ones that come out of school with an English degree or an English literature degree sometimes are not the people I want to hire, because I think with the comics I make, which is, as you know, they're not about capes and tights. I'm not into superheroes. The only superhero book that I really loved that got my attention was Elementals, because Bill Willingham was doing to comics what I think people 10 years ago started to think they were revolutionizing comics with. And it was just coming at comics from a completely different place, not using the traditional methods to both write a love letter to and eviscerate the tropes and structure of comics. I mean, Bill has been doing that since 1985, which is why I think he's a genius, which is why I couldn't wait to get my hands around his throat and throttle him and make him pitch me something for Vertigo, because I knew what a genius he was. And I knew he still had a series in him that would not only take over the industry and garner 14 Eisner Awards, but that would make him. And I single-handedly resurrected his career, and he has agreed with me. He's given that to me, which I'm like, thank you, Bill.
Yeah, he should, for sure.
I'll take a new car now.
Yeah.
If you're feeling generous, I could use a new car. I'm unemployed, but I will give Bill that. In writing, he did say he owes me his career. But believe me, his genius, it was something that I never forgot. And it's, back to you for a second. I think that at least what I looked for when I was working full-time for a mainstream publisher, I wanted people with experience who weren't afraid to work hard, and people that would show up and do the work, because there are so many dilettantes out there. There are so many people with Ivy League degrees in comics and outside of comics who say, oh, I can write. Oh, I know how to teach comics. And they really don't have the practical experience or the chops, because they do a lot of talk and they can talk big on theory, but when it comes to execution, they're not around. And I have no respect for those people. So I'm much more impressed by people who actually show up, have an interest, listen, take advice on, use what they can glean that works for them, and then carve out their own style, which is how I developed my whole editing manifesto. Because I learned a lot from different people along the way, certainly from Diana Schutz, who was my first boss, and Karen for believing in me without a doubt. And I think 90% of the time, Karen and I were on the same page with projects. But there were plenty of times where she would look at me and be like, I don't get it. And frankly, that became Lodger. That was a pitch that David Lapham and I gave to her back in maybe 2010, 2011. She didn't get it. And we had to end Young Liars early in the run. We got 3 trades, which was great, 18 issues. I, as you know, because you know me, worship the ground that Lapham walked on.
Yes.
I would never tell him.
It's awesome.
I would never tell him. That's a reproduction, by the way. It was a gift from my old boss, Chris Ryle. But it really bugged me when Karen would reject my pitches. But she did me a favor, because I came back to it when I was at Black Crown. And I said, David, come on, here's the olive branch. Let's kick it up. Let's do it and make it better than ever. And I think we did.
How difficult is it curating something of this magnitude with so many different personalities and so many different so many different people? I mean, over 140 creatives on this project.
You drink a lot of Diet Coke. This is my vice. I kid you not. It's my treat and my vice. Look, I think editing is not for the faint-hearted, and the one job I equate it to is like waitressing. And I've had so many shit jobs, but I have such a great respect for people who waitress, who are bartenders. I come from a family-run business. My dad's a dry cleaner, stroke musician, and I'm sure he wishes he was a musician and not a dry cleaner. But I was raised to get up, go to work, do your job. If you feel sick, go to work anyway. You'll feel
Mhm.
better. And do what you're paid to do and treat it like it's your own. So that's gotten me into trouble sometimes, thanks, Dad. But for the most part, an editor has to own it. So you do what it takes to get the job done. So when I'm curating, I know it's a big job, but I just get in there and start running. Hit the ground running. It's what makes a comic book come alive. And it makes me miss the monthly series so much because I think we've become complacent in this industry. A lot of these big companies have people who are called editors who don't know how to edit. And what they are facilitators. They're paper pushers. Some of them don't even call to let artists or writers know that they received their work, or if they did, what they think about it. Because I think the craft isn't taught anymore. Because a lot of the founding mothers and fathers of editing and of publishing have been pushed out. So it's become a very different world. And I think that's why when you go into comic book stores, you can look around and you don't see anything jump into your arms off the shelf. You
Mhm.
can't read a lot of the logos because the job of the cover is to capture your attention. It's hard when there's so much text competing with your eye. You have six people on a book. You have people who can't meet their deadlines that are hired for monthly books, so then they get fill-ins and they get other people to help, and you get a mishmash, which is why I think corporate comics really are, in a lot of cases, vile because it becomes art by committee. When you
Yeah.
don't when you don't have one vision and one through line, it's the Wild West. And that's what's disappointing to me about our culture right now. People don't know that the comics are an art form, which is what got me back into indie comics. They got me in, and now I'm in my happiest place ever because I'm surrounded by them and I'm making the ones I want to read again, which is beyond gratifying.
Because that's been a lot of my issues with. I mean, I'll just say it. With Marvel and DC, I still read some of them, but most like I've been reading indies since I was younger too. I mean, obviously Vertigo I think is what got me into looking at books that were not superhero stuff, and it's slowly grown to where now it's kind of overtaking my taste in comics. And the
Yes,
cartoonist
my
the
daughter's done.
cartoonist yeah, cartoonist kayfabe I've has
Oh,
kind of kept me
the,
sane.
the best. Those
Yeah.
guys, I mean,
Oh.
honestly, love them to pieces. I'll blush if I talk about Ed too much, but Jim and I go way back.
I know.
Jim is a genius.
Yeah.
Ed, I'm gonna blush for a minute. He's a genius too, but because I haven't worked with him, I can still be like shy about him.
Yeah, I mean those guys have kind of rewired my brain. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah,
I knew of them right before quarantine. I knew and I knew of the books they worked on, but I hadn't picked them up yet. Um, and then I watched one shoot interview with of theirs, and I'm like, I need more. And or no, I'm sorry. Let me go back. I read Hip Hop Family Tree. I'm a huge hip hop
yeah.
head.
And I read Hip Hop Family Tree too, and that's how I discovered Ed.
Yeah, I read Volume
I
One.
got it on Free Comic Book Day. I'm like, where has this guy been my entire life?
That's how I felt. And I'm just like, so then I watched the channel. I went back to the beginning. I've watched every single video that those two put out that
Yeah,
because I wasn't working. So it was a steady diet of cartoonist kayfabe and then on eBay buying all these books
yeah,
that they were talking about that I never had before. So I'm like, I'm not even reading newer comics. I'm going back and I'm reading stuff from the 80s. I'm reading
yeah.
stuff from early 90s.
It's
Yeah.
it's foundation. In fact, I've said this before. I was never a huge collector of comics except for the ones that I love, of course, the indies. But when Ed came out with Grand Design, that's how I learned about the Marvel Universe. I mean, I read, of course I read anything Mike Allred would do. I loved his Silver Surfer and I loved Ecstatics. And
Brilliant.
I mean, Mike Allred is one of my oldest friends and one of my first friends in comics. So I'll follow him into a volcano. But Ed taught me the rules and taught me about like Fantastic Four. Like, what do I know about these characters? Like that's all I've read, except for a smattering of what Bill Sienkiewicz was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I bought it for the art. I have a New Mutants. I bought it for the art. But
they reignited my passion for comics again. I was feeling kind of complacent. I had been writing reviews for my site, but I felt like it was just, I was forcing myself. I felt like there was no passion behind it anymore on some of the stuff I was writing I was like, I felt like I'm just doing it for content. And that's not why I started the site. I started it because of my love for the medium, and I wanted to share that with other people. That's why I started the podcast. That's why I started the YouTube channel. You were one of the first, I think you were one of the first people I reached out to. I reached out to a couple people to try and line up some interviews, and I was so stoked that you said yes. I think I even tweeted that I wanted them to do an interview with you on Cartoonist Kayfabe, and I'm like, why am I going to wait for that interview? I'll do one. I'll do one.
Good for you. I like that. See, I like that about you already. Like, and believe me when I tell you, I not only have I talked to them, and they want to put me down for at some point in the summer to do an interview, but I was watching the Ho Che Anderson interview. The
amazing.
Best. And I was actually teasing them because I worked with Ho Che Anderson for a hot minute, as they say. I don't think I've ever used that phrase, but it's true. In 1990, I was at Kamiko, and Ho did his first work for Grendel Tales. And it was my absolute favorite Grendel Tales story. It was written by Stephen T. Siegel, who was a great friend for many years. And it had my favorite line of Grendel. It's the last line of the story. I don't know if you read the story.
I haven't.
If you didn't, you must get it.
Okay.
It's about a kid who gets a tattoo of Grendel, and it says, "At least I know that I am not Grendel." And I'll never forget that. So I kept writing to Ed and Jim during that show, like, ask Ho about the Grendel Tales issue. And so they were so funny. And Ed was like, "Oh my God, I wanted to do that, but I forgot because I got carried away," because Ho was the best guest of any podcast I've ever seen. Right?
I know. I mean, I've never heard of Ho Che Anderson, and I'm ashamed to say that I haven't heard of some of these names, but I'm so happy that even all these years into comics, because I'm 33, I've been reading comics since I was 5. I still find new creators, and it's amazing. Like the David Cho interview, I mean, that was amazing too. And I mean, I think halfway through the Ho Che Anderson, I went and ordered King.
Yeah.
That was, I'm like, I have to read this.
No, and you shouldn't feel bad about not knowing some of these names. I mean, Ho Che Anderson is someone who, I can only say I remember because I was an assistant. Well, I was, a young woman right out of college working in comics, and he was starting out. Now, I didn't follow his work through the years. I knew that what he was doing, but I think for me, I was so busy making comics that sometimes I really did miss what my peers were doing, because I think he and I are about around the same age. But yeah, what a tremendous voice in comics, and revolutionary style, not unlike what a Frank Miller, a Bill Sienkiewicz, really has his own flair, and you can't say that anymore. Like, you can really count on one hand the people that are coming out who really capture your attention and that warrant not only, further exploration of their past work, but certainly their current work. And I'm rejuvenated about him, and also about quite a few other people that I've seen on the channel. But yeah, and Jim is, by far one of the nicest people in comics too, and a total pro. Yeah. I actually met him at a Mocha show in New York City, right when Street Angel was coming out. And I went to his table, and I was very taken with the cover of Street Angel #1. And I remember asking him if he was a David Lapham fan, because there was frenetic energy to his ink line. And he said, "Oh my God, of course." And I was like, wow, well, I work at Vertigo, but my favorite comic on the planet is Stray Bullets. I I love David Lapham, and I would love to work with you in comics. And so that's how we started working together. And I don't know if you've read The Plain Janes.
Yes.
Okay, so that was really the first project that I worked on with Jim, and I introduced him to Cecil Castellucci, and that was her first job in comics. She had been a published novelist, but
Right.
I got to working with her, and they were like, wow, from the get-go. They just clicked and continue to have a great working relationship to this
Yeah,
day.
it's amazing. I also wanted to talk about, you are now editing Bitter Root.
Yes.
I love that book, and it only got better when I found out you were the editor on it. How did that come about?
Wow, that was actually funny. So first of all, Sanford Green is one of my favorite people on the planet and one of the greatest artists working today. And I look you in the eye, and I don't just mean comic book artists.
Mm-hmm.
Sanford is such a draftsman and a craftsperson and an architect of style and of emotion. And his characters are unlike any other I've seen in modern art. So I don't use that term lightly. I'm not looking for him to send me free artwork, believe me. Working with him is a joy, and I do it because I adore him, and I also love the project. But the short story is that back when I was finishing up Hey Amateur, I was working so hard to get the book to the printer before Christmas, and Sanford agreed to do a page for me in Hey Amateur. You probably recall.
Mm-hmm.
It was how to do a particular kung fu technique.
Yeah.
And Sanford and I have only worked together on some very short projects. We've stayed in touch over the years. We worked together on a short Nightwing story once when I was forced to work on a DC Valentine special that I didn't understand why I was even asked to edit it, but whatever. I said, if I'm editing it, I'm bringing my people on the book. And so I said, and I want Nightwing. And having Sanford draw Nightwing was enough for me. But I wanted to work with him again. So he's been contributing bits and pieces. He did a variant cover for Assassinista, as you might remember. When that came out, he did an exclusive cover. So he agreed to do a story in Hey Amateur, and he was one of the last people to turn in his work. He did pencil, so I knew he was working on it. And so he called me, and I thought he was going to ask me for a little more time. So here I am. It must have been 11:30 at night. And he's on the East Coast, so he's, I don't know, up all hours. And he called me, and I thought maybe he wanted an extension. And so I said, Sanford, you're up at 2:30 in the morning. It's all good. Take another 2 days. I got your back. And he's like, oh no, I got a big problem. And I'm thinking, oh my God, did his wife leave him? What's going on? Well, he told me that he was working on Bitter Root, and his current editor was no longer on the project, and he really needed someone to help wrangle the team together so the book could come out for Black History Month in February. And he caught me at the weirdest time. I mean, I was in the 11th hour of designing and assembling Hey Amateur, which, as you know, I mean, you know, this thing was not easy to put together. I wanted it to be beautiful with the satin ribbon. I was like, Stanford, are you really offering me a job, you know, in the 11th hour of getting this book out to the printer? He's like, I'm desperate. And I was like, I was reticent to take on anything before I got Hey Amateur to the printer. I said, look, I could never say no to you. I'm in. So he was just like super excited. And we spent the next 2 hours talking about the book. I read the first issue of Bitter Root, but then I'm not sure what happened. I wasn't regularly going to the comic book store, so I think I just lost track, and I was working on Black Crowns. So I said, send me the whole book. I think I know what it's about, but I want to see where you've been so I know where we're going. And he did. I read the book and I was absolutely floored. I read the Red Summer Special and I felt like this should be required reading in every civics class in every high school. So I was honored to join the team. The team is not unlike a fractured family. They're all friends and they're all like brothers and they fight. And so I was coming in to really get the family back together because they were frustrated. I think their other editor had other jobs and they they needed a schedule. They needed to get back on a solid ground. And so I kind of came in with a big red pen and a big broom, and I said, all right, let's take it back. Let's make it happen. And sure enough, we got the book not only to launch on time, but wow, I'm just blown away where they've taken it. It has gone above my expectations, to say the least.
Yeah, I think it's crazy that we got the return of Bitterroot, Black History Month. Then we get the return after COVID with the state of, the world right now.
Yep.
I think you had Bitterroot and Excellence. Both of those books came out on the same day, and both really touch on themes that are prevalent in society right now. I think it's almost eerie, you know what I mean? But those are great titles. Yes.
Yes. It's so necessary and relevant. And we were actually just the team was just talking a couple of weeks ago. David Walker, who, by the way, is one of the greatest writers working right now that a lot of people don't know about. And I think because he co-writes with Brian Bendis, I think people probably don't really know he's got some serious chops on his own.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of respect for co-writers. It's not an easy thing. And in fact, Bill Willingham once said to me that it really almost isn't worth your time when you're working with a co-writer, because it's twice as much work than if you would write it yourself. But there's something really, I think there's a kindness to when you have a co-writer who maybe doesn't have the same profile that you do. And there's a wonderful camaraderie that you can get from, two different points of view on a book. But it's tricky. And there's a power balance that you have to make sure you maintain. So back to David and Chuck Brown, who is also a terrific writer. They've been co-writing the book, and the way they work is very different to other co-writers I've met. So that's been a learning curve for me. But we've been talking about, issue 10, which was written many months ago. I did an edit on it, and David had been working on the rewrite throughout the pandemic. And I know he's been distracted because of world events, and I couldn't blame him. And we've had many discussions about how can we wrap up the story we wanted to tell for issue 2, for arc 2, Rage and Redemption. How can we wrap it up and acknowledge the horror and vitriol that's outside our doors, that's spewing from the TV every day, without compromising our original intent? And I have to say that it took him a few more weeks and maybe a month longer than he had liked and than I had liked, but it was worth it, because I think that final issue 10 of the arc really says it all about not only the Tulsa riots and the Harlem Renaissance, which is where the setting is for the book, but 2020 and probably the future. And it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear. I'm a huge fan of David Walker's, and I think I can kind of pick his style out, between him and Bendis with Naomi, and now he's on Young Justice with Bendis as well. But I feel like I can see his parts. You know what I mean? I feel like I've been able to identify his writing enough that I can, and Bendis, because I've read a lot of Brian Bendis' stuff. So I feel like I can kind of separate, a little bit of the writing. And I mean, like his Power Man and Iron Fist was probably one of the best books Marvel's put out in the last decade. Wow. And I was so sad to see it go. It was so different from everything else Marvel put out. And I feel like every time those books get pushed through into the process of being, printed, they don't last long. And I just don't understand why the big two are so scared of having a unique book like that. It blows my mind, Well,
I think the other thing that's really sad is, you hit it on the head. That was a tremendous book. It did so well that's why David was brought on to Bitterroot to be a part of the team, because Sanford and David really gelled. Chuck and Sanford had worked together before, and they did great work together. But I think the big companies forget, or maybe they've never know. I think when you have dilettantes and you have people in high places who really don't know about the craft and the history of comics. And believe me, I'm no authority on the history of comics or superhero comics. I confess. But when you don't have a respect for the inner makings of the story, the art, the process, you don't understand that to become good, to create beautiful, meaningful stories that linger and resonate, that live on, you have to let them evolve. And that means you have to sign on for a year. So I think a lot of the problems I'm seeing with some of the newer writers is sometimes they're just not ready for the big leagues. And listen, not everyone was when we hired them back in the 90s. You know, Ed Brubaker cut his teeth in the early days in the indie world with Low Life, which I loved. His navel gazing, he represented my world. You know, I'm his peer. He was representing the kids that I would bump into at the record shop or at the comic book store. I loved his
I love that book.
Pretentious cadence. And that's why, you know, Lou Stathis, who was an editor at Vertigo, hired him to write Prez with Eric Schanauer. And then when Lou passed away, I took the mantle. I said, Ed, write something for me, damn it. And he pitched me Scene of the Crime, which was, I think, one of the greatest crime fiction series that came out in the 90s. And putting him together with Michael Lark and Sean Phillips, well, look where that went. I mean, some of the greatest comics of our generation, or, you know, so, but Ed wrote Dead Enders for me, you know, and that ran probably not long enough. I think it ran, I want to say 15 or 18 issues, but you have to let people write monthly books so they can cut their teeth. And by writing a monthly book, that doesn't mean, oh, let's hire this person and give them 6 months to write a miniseries. I don't think that people adhere to monthly deadlines anymore. And that's to the detriment of the writer and the artist and the editor, because that's how you learn the craft. You know, in the old days, we said, we're going to hire you as a monthly writer. We're going to give you 2 storylines. We're going to give you a year. Here are your deadlines for the next year. You get 1 week to write your monthly script. So like Peter Milligan, for instance, who, by the way, the nicest thing I can say about Peter Milligan is he hit his deadlines. And he never missed a deadline. And he was very professional about taking feedback and then addressing it. Even if I had to give him, you know, feedback 8 times for one script, it didn't matter. I think both Peter Milligan and Mike Carey were the most professional in that respect. You know, Mike Carey will remember the days when he first started where he had 7 drafts of Lucifer #2 and maybe Lucifer #26, because you write till you get it. And sometimes that's 1 draft and sometimes that's 4. But just going back to the idea that you had 1 week, you wrote 22 pages, and then the editor would take a few days to get back to you, and then you would have another week for rewrites, and that was it. And you had to keep the train moving. And I think that's what's missing today from modern comics, is that if the editor does one thing for you, in addition to bossing you around, which you can't be afraid to do. If you want to be an editor, Ryan, you can't be afraid to say no and fire people, but you have to hold people accountable. So when I give a deadline out, if I've got to chase you for it, that's my job. So as a young editor, I was relentless. You know, I worked 10, 12 hours a day, calling people on the phone, yelling at people if I had to, bribing them, like my husband, sending him Oreos. He was living in England, so I'd send him all kinds of crazy mixtapes and American chocolate. That's dangerous too, because I fell in love with him that way, and vice versa. But the bottom line is, you got to hit your deadlines, and we got to move on. So if there's an artist who's not going to get me all the pencils in, I've got to get another artist to work with them, or get 2 inkers on a book. It's got to get done, or it doesn't come out. And I think that editors that I've noticed today, they're not taught that part of the job, and they're afraid to do that part of the job because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. And a lot of them are not really editing. Their bosses are saying, do this and this, A, B, and C, make this happen, or worse. Some of these people in high places rewrite their work, and then they don't tell them. And that's why you have a lot of animosity from writers who, rightly so, should not have been rewritten, because an editor is not a writer. You know, our job is to make the talent look as great as they can be. But my job is not to rewrite your phrase. I'm not an editor who wants to be a writer. I'm an editor who wants to edit and curate. So anyone who tells you to rewrite, change an adjective without someone's consent is doing you no favors and is actually not teaching you how to edit correctly.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't even know that some editors could do that. Your career is taking you from Kamiko to Vertigo, Black Crown. You're a freelance editor now. What keeps you so enthusiastic all these years? And because you always seem so enthusiastic every time you talk about comics.
It's his fault. But you know what? It's also his fault too. Philip Bond. If I make a fabric pillow out of an image, I'm crazy about it. This one is by Martin Simmons, who I'm sure you remember from Punk's Not Dead.
Yes.
So how about that? This is why I'm excited about comics, because I like nothing more than saluting my heroes. And David Lapham isn't my only favorite, by the way. Charles Burns, I would lick glass and I would eat my son's drumsticks to work with him. When I read Last Look, and I was reading it the summer after I left DC when my position was eliminated, I spent the summer at the Burbank Library, the Buena Vista Library, sorry. And I read Last Look, and I fell to my knees and I practically was weeping on the floor. I think the librarian thought I was like mental. I remember calling my husband and saying, come to the library. Come to pick me up at the library right now. And he was like, why are you whispering? I'm like, I'm at the library. But Charles Burns is the genius of comics, full stop. And I said, come here now. You need to sit down and read this. And he did. And Philip is the first one to tell me I'm all about hyperbole. He's not with me on the David Lapham bandwagon. We have very different tastes in comics and the people we worship. Similar to music, although we actually have more favorite. I think we actually have a more similar record collection as opposed to a comics collection. But he agreed with me that, like, wow, you know, people like Charles Burns, they're the real masters of the medium. You know, they do things that make me think, that come back and haunt me days, months, years later, that make me go and reread their work. And they make me feel alive. So rediscovering the masters, finding new talent, and sometimes from other mediums. I'm an Anglophile across the board, as you probably know. You can just look behind me. My musical taste influences everything I do. So of course I like British talent, and I put a lot of British talent in insider art too, because there are so many people of different ages and genders. There's such a diverse mix across the globe of talented people who don't want to do comics about order versus chaos, who want to do comics about the human condition and about what makes us tick in 2020 and what we want people to remember about ourselves. So I guess I just think that comics is the ultimate art form, and it's a way to interact. I mean, I'm actually a private person, and I'm shy, and I don't even like being on camera. I was a behind the camera person in college, and I loved, you know, shooting video and photography, and tape was never about being in front of the camera. But if I can talk to you and talk to other people about the beauty of comics, about the process, about how it's conducting a symphony, and it's about ripping apart everything underneath the hood of a car to make it actually purr and hum and sing, that's what an editor does. And there's no greater feeling than finding people from all over the world, and artists like Anja Venter, who is magnificent, who's in South Africa, and artists like Danny and Eugenia Komaki, who live in Greece, who are a part of Insider Art, and Canadian artists. There's so much talent out there, and all you have to do is open up your eyes. We're living in times where there's no excuse. If you want to make comics, do it. You can do it. You can get it out there on Gumroad, on your own Instagram account. I have no patience anymore for people that say, oh yeah, I want to write a comic. Oh yeah, I want to draw a comic. There's nothing holding you back.
Over your career, I mean, the industry has changed quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
What do you think needs to happen to sustain the industry, especially in this trying time? You know, like COVID shut down a lot of stores. Um, I know diversity is definitely one of the most important things that we need to see in this industry. I still don't think we're there
No.
by a mile.
Oh yeah.
So,
True.
what do you think is the most important thing that needs to take place in order for this industry to thrive?
Right now, without naming names, there's the comic book industry is a horror show on so many levels. It should be raised to the ground so we can rebuild. I think that big companies should should acknowledge the fact that they've done a disservice to a whole lot of talented women and men, but mostly women.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to admit that there's been sexism and chauvinism and ageism running rampant over the years. You know, I could say it's analogous to the political administration out there. And I don't even really talk politics or put politics into my work. I really respect everybody's choices. I'm a snob about music, of course. If somebody doesn't know who Joe Strummer is, I probably don't want to hang out with him in a bar and talk about 80s music. But I don't want to tell anyone who to like or what makes them feel good. So to each his own in politics and religion and reading material, but come on. We have to all come together and treat each other with respect. I mean, that's the bottom line. Treat others like you want to be treated. And I think within comics, I think we have to realize we've got to get the dilettantes out and we've got to keep an eye on who is running the show. I mean, there are very few female editor-in-chiefs out there. And I'd like to see companies actually stepping up by admitting that sometimes they make mistakes and sometimes they eliminate positions for no other reason than the person's the top of the chain or they already filled a bucket. You know, if they have a certain quota of people of a certain race or certain gender, sometimes they get, you know, they think, well, let me just hire my friend. Well, that doesn't make great comics because your friend doesn't know what he's doing. And I see that happening a lot. And it's sad. So I sound old and grumpy. I couldn't be happier with what I'm doing. I mean, I get to make comics that I want to read, and I get to pick and choose who I want to work with. And right now, being unemployed, I'm doing comics that I love as a labor of love. So I feel like I'm in a really good position to be able to say, look, the world outside is an ugly place. We don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, people that are running around outside without masks, you know, going into stadiums, I mean, having to sign a waiver in case they get COVID so that they can't sue. I mean, we're living in a really fucked up time. And
Yeah.
I think that the moral of our times is be nice, be better than that, and learn by example of how not to act. Because there are more bad leaders out there than good. Dig deep inside and trust your gut, stick to your guns, don't let naysayers get in the way, and just be kind, be good to yourself and others, and work with the people who make you happy. That's like the greatest thing that I can share with you, and I really hope you pursue editing because I think a lot of people that want to edit think it's very glamorous. You know, I see a lot of people in high positions who flash a credit card, who like to take people out to dinner and yuck it up and ask me if I have any horror stories about Grant Morrison or Neil Gaiman. You know, I loved working with both of those guys, by the way, and I'm really grateful for the time I've had in comics working with terrific people. And I've worked with a lot of nightmares too, believe me. I used to say I spend a lot of time taming egos, but that's part of the job. But all I can say is like life is too short and you just have to do what you think is right for you and hang out with people who make you happy. Because at the end of the day, that's all we've got. And set a good example for your own kids and for your family and the people that you hold closest. But yeah, for the industry at large, I say take a good look around and realize that most people in comics don't want to make comics about about women running around in bikinis and high heels. And most people in comics don't want to read about order versus chaos and the same old, very staid and old-fashioned garbage that sometimes gets revered when it's not the satire you think it is. You know, it's actually offensive and horrible. I
Yeah.
hope I answered the question.
Yeah, definitely.
Did I?
Yeah.
I can ramble. I can ramble.
I could listen to you all day. This is probably one of the most enjoyable interviews that I've ever done. So I'm soaking it all in. I'm soaking it all in. No, I'm serious.
I'm gonna call Jim Rugg when we hang up. I'm gonna be like, Jim, did he say that? Like, and he's gonna be like, oh my God, Ryan, yes, he totally did.
No, I said I enjoyed it, but I feel like this has been one of the most informative interviews I've ever done. That's why I just wanted to talk to you like face to face in a way, you know, because it's not the same over email. It's just not, you know.
And that's what's also lost, by the way, in comic book editing. So back in the day in the 90s, I mean, you said you're 33. Let's just say I've got maybe 20 years on you, maybe 21. I'm not gonna admit to anything, so don't even take me there. But we didn't have email, so we had to communicate on the phone. And so much is lost when you don't pick up the phone and articulate how you feel. Because I'll tell you, some of my favorite memories about working on Shade the Changing Man were when I could call Peter Milligan after reading a script and literally be sweating because the poetry was so beautiful. I couldn't believe my eyes. And the times when I would work with Grant Morrison on The Invisibles, and I thought what he just wrote could change the nation state, you know, like has been so profound, you know, and I'm not trying to be over dramatic, but I would rather someone tell me that on the phone than type it in an email. Yeah. Because everything in writing can be misconstrued. And that's, I think, one of the great tragedies of modern day editing is when you get that email, it's pretty much like saying the check's in the mail. Got it, thanks. Well, what does it mean to you? You know, every editor needs to know about art. Now, I didn't go to art school, but in college, I took a few figure drawing classes. I took 3D design. I had some animation classes. I took screenwriting. So there were bits and pieces, but anything that I've done since then, I've had to educate myself. So for instance, I did a lot of asking questions and listening to people like Matt Wagner, who's like one of the most amazing graphic designers and draftsmen that we have, and Mark Buckingham too.
Yeah.
Peter Gross. They're wonderful, very clear, clean, straightforward storytellers. And then there are people like Bill Sienkiewicz, who you look at the art and you study it for years and you still didn't see every nuance in Stray Toasters because he also wrote it. And he's someone who is a genius writer, which I don't think people know about him. He's such a gifted writer too. He's just like, you know, the full like package, like the quintessential 21st century artist of our times. So I think that you don't need to go to school, so you should not even think twice about that. But how you're educating yourself is exactly the best way to become a great editor. I always loved graphic design, and every art director that's worked with me in my career has hated me, and they've called me a frustrated art director because guess what? That's what I am. And editing is art directing. And anyone who doesn't know what it means to kern or about a ligature or a typeface or a serif versus a sans serif should start lettering, which is what I've done. I lettered most of the stories in Hey Amateur because I wanted to start lettering. I needed to save some money. I couldn't pay people to letter, so I started doing it myself. My husband taught me a lot about Illustrator and Photoshop because he's also one of those people who does everything well. And that's a tough act to follow, by the way. We've been married 20 years. He's still my favorite artist. He's still my favorite person in the world. He does everything well, and I do not. I have to try really hard or I fake it. But Insider Art, I said when I put that together, I would edit the garage, but I wanted to design it, and I wanted to art direct it, and I wanted to create a direction. So I made sure everyone knew that going in. And so I think I even got a tiny, tiny bit of applause from my husband for that book, because he thought I came a long way from Hey Amateur to that book. I needed less of his help on Insider Art for Assembly. But I think that it's important to know the craft, and what you're doing is great. Talking to people, learning by looking at the work, looking at the old work, looking at the new work, looking at people, going to their websites and asking questions. That's the best way to learn how to be an editor. And bring in your other influences. Like you said, you like hip hop. Bring in your musical influences. If you have a passion for something strange, like I love tap dancing. That's always been one of my things. That's my exercise. So that's something that I can sometimes bring into a project. All of those little things that make you the person you are, that makes you a very distinctive editor in your own right. So just keep being open to learning by doing, and don't stop doing. Don't stop with your site and making comics. And if you want to edit comics, you will edit comics. Don't hesitate to reach out to me again if you need some tips.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot. I also wanted to ask you, for curiosity, and also so maybe I can learn about some new stuff. What creators or books are you following that you're really excited about right now that maybe I don't know about, or the listeners may not know?
Well, I'm happy to provide you with a typed out list so people can actually go to the websites. But on insiderart.net, we have 142 artists and their bios and their links. So if you go to the contributor section, the website was designed by Sophie Dodgson, and she's also the colorist of Bitter Root. So she is the #1 person that I beg you, when you click hang up on this interview, please go track her down. She not only designed the Insider Art website, but she's a costume designer. She's a comic book colorist. She's only been working in the industry the past few years. I've only met her since she joined Bitter Root, and I think she's probably the greatest new freelancer we have in comics, because she's a wonderful artist too. She did a piece in the craft room in Insider Art on how to make some masks, which I'll bet you'd like to make with your kids. You have a couple of kids, don't you?
I have a 5-year-old daughter, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, perfect. Insider Art is perfect for a 5-year-old girl, believe me. The people in that book I also recommend are Jade Perkin, who is tremendous. She is a British talent. Rachel Smith, who has a quarantine comic out every week. I want to say every day, but I don't know if she does it every day, but she's someone to be keeping an eye on. God, I've been reading so much. I also try to read novels as well, because I could just read comics forever. But the last graphic novel that I bought that I cannot recommend highly enough is Bezamina, which is by Nina, and I'm going to butcher her last name, but Bujevac. Go to the Fantagraphics website. I was knocked out by that graphic novel to the same extent that Charles Burns knocks me out. And she has a very similar inking approach as Charles Burns, but she just, wow, blew my mind. I think she's up for an Eisner Award, and she also won a few other awards. So she's someone to check out. China Clugston Flores is a great friend in comics, and anything she does I think is hilarious. She's one of the most underrated cartoonists of the generation between us. I want to say my generation, but she's a lot younger than she's a lot younger than me, but I act so immature that I feel like we're the same age. But if you don't know Blue Monday, that was a series she did in the 90s that I think you should track down. It's a lot of fun.
I have heard of it. I've never read it, though, but I definitely will check it out. It's next up on my list.
Yeah. Those are just the people off the top of my head. I can send you a full list. And again, I'm happy to be a resource for you at any time. I would be happy to come back. I've got a couple of other things up my sleeve that I'm working on.
I was going to ask you that.
Well, you probably heard that every now and then I'll tease my memoir, which is called Filth and Grammar. Did you ever hear me tease that?
I haven't heard that. I don't know how I missed that.
I don't talk about it a lot. I basically started to write my memoir during the year after my position was eliminated at DC, I was on contract, and if I wanted my severance, I couldn't talk or I couldn't work for anyone for like 6 months. So I took that time to actually go to the library and read comics and write. And a lot of the writing that I did was ridiculous. I started like a comic that was a cross between The Sure Thing meets Caligula, which I'll finish someday. But it's really mean. It's mean spirited, and it's not my finest hour. But I also started Filth and Grammar, which is part memoir of the 90s, which I know the 90s are big and back, but like I really came of age in the 90s. I was living in New York City. I knew very few people in New York. I moved there to work in comics. I walked a 6-block radius from DC Comics. I took the cheapest apartment I could find in Hell's Kitchen. My mom helped me financially. She was with me. We took an apartment. My father would have died. He would not have let me live there if he was with us on that trip. And so my mom always wanted to live in New York. And she said, I'll deal with your dad later. Take this apartment. And so I did. And I spent all of those years working my butt off. Did not have an active social life. My life was working at DC Comics 10 hours a day. But my weekends were downtown, St. Mark's Place, hanging out in the record shop, video store. That's what Black Crown was. It was a love letter to St. Mark's Place in the 90s for me. So the memoir is part, I don't want to say Sex in the City because it wasn't glamorous like that. It was a lot of sweat. It was a lot of making comics, but it was a lot of great live shows in New York. So it was a lot of fun times, a lot of movies, a lot of shopping adventures at markets and, cheap places, a lot of tap dancing. But it's also about the craft of comics. It's my particular editing style. So that's where the grammar comes in. It's about behind the scenes, and it's also about working in a boys club because comics saw a wonderful uptick in luring women into the business back in the 90s because there were more women that were in lower positions in editorial. A lot of them didn't rise through the ranks because it took a very long time to go from assistant to associate to editor to senior editor to group editor to executive editor. A lot of them didn't last. A lot of them didn't come to comics because they liked comics. Sometimes it was a temp job. A lot of them worked in marketing or maybe the production department. But what's been tragic in comics, which I know you've noticed, not unlike our politics, we went through a stage where there were a lot of women, and then a lot of women left comics because it became an ugly place. And we're seeing that on Twitter again. And we saw that in the corporate environment where you see people taken advantage of, and you go to the HR department to complain, and you sometimes don't get justice. And that stinks. So I'd like to see comics get to a place where it can be safe for everyone again, on the outside, at conventions, in the freelance community, and inside the office as well. Because we can all do better.
And not to say that I didn't think about these things in the past, but having a daughter has definitely made me look at things differently, and it makes me angrier than it did, like on a more personal level, because I don't ever want my daughter to experience some of the stuff like you said on Twitter. I won't say names either, but it's upsetting to hear that some of these things that are happening or have happened to women, and I'm glad that some of these women are coming to light and saying it, because it needs to stop. And if nobody says anything, it will just continue,
right. And I will say that my memoir is specifically written for people like your daughter. Like, I want women to know, I want the next generation of women who are going out looking for jobs to know that, it's always going to be tough. I mean, there are people that will say to your face, men hate women. And there are a lot of feminists that believe that. I'm the kind of feminist that knows that there are great men out there. And I was lucky enough to marry one. And I feel like there are a lot of great people out there. But just when you're in a minority of any kinds, you have to work a little harder. Being a short woman, people used to treat me like a child because I looked young. I certainly don't anymore. But believe me, when I was 26, people thought I was 18. And that was a problem. And I had to act twice as professional and sometimes a bit more conservative the way I dressed and I didn't want to have to tailor my way of dress in my day-to-day work life, but it made people respect me a little bit more because I didn't look like that goth kid who rolled in from seeing The Cure at Roseland. At least I was. I'm not going to say whether I was, but I'm writing the memoir for all different reasons, but also to get it off my chest so I can move on. But it's not going to be a scathing tell-all. It's going to be a little bit of reality check, because sometimes the truth is very plain and black and white. And like my dad would always say to me, the truth is easy to remember. It's the lies that trip you up. So I like to say that, like, if you were nice to me in my career, you have nothing to worry about. Filth and grammar.
Yeah.
That's my ad.
I'm so excited to read that. I can't wait for that to come out.
Thank you. My goal is to finish the draft by the end of the summer, and I'm excited. I'm having a blast working on it. So thanks.
Are you going to self-publish it?
I'm not sure. At this stage, I don't know. You know, I really want to get the first draft out of the way. I've got lots of bits and pieces. I've been chipping away at it over the years, but when Chris Ryle hired me to do Blackground, I knew I had to make a choice. I could kind of finish it and take a year to finish it, or I could make comics. And there was no contest. I mean, Chris pretty much opened up the door at Blackground and rolled the red carpet out, and I just went for it. I said, you know what? I'll always have my story, but I won't always have this opportunity to create this wonderful world. So Blackground was 3 years of my husband and I making the coolest comics on the planet. And we stand by those 10 trades. We stand by them, and we're so proud of them, and we have no regrets.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to know that as someone who was a fan of that imprint. I hope that someday it's going to be like unearthed, kind of like some of those indie record labels that like you forget about, and you're like, hey, yeah, I love everything 4AD did. I have to own everything. I'm hoping people will discover Blackground like that, because it was a wonderful 3 years of time that we'll cherish.
Yeah, I mean, the passion came through on all of that, on every single book. Before we go, I just wanted to thank you. And I also wanted to ask you if you want to throw out any plugs, where we can find you on social media, where we can purchase Insider Art.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. On social media, I'm at SX Bond. On Twitter. On Instagram, I'm at SX Bond Imprimatur. I'm on Facebook. I absolutely highly recommend Insider Art to anyone with a pulse. I rarely do all ages books, but it's for babies. Read these wonderful prose stories to your children. It's got comics. It's got crafts. And I know your daughter, for one, I certainly hope she's going to want to make some teddy bears, because I actually have a 2-page feature on how to make little teddy bears. So I have a feeling your daughter likes teddy bears. So I highly recommend it for you guys. It also has games. It's got tons of cats in it. If you wanted to go to the website to check out some of the wonderful female and non-binary creators, the website is insiderart.net. And I just want to again say that every bit of money that is raised from Insider Art, we have a suggested donation on Gumroad. It's $10, but you can pay whatever you'd like. So you can get it now. It's digital. It's 270 pages. You can get it at gumroad.com/Insider Art. All the money from this anthology, also from an eBay auction on Facebook, the Comic Book Shopping Network, run by Jen King, who's our retailer liaison, and fabric that we're going to have available on Spoonflower, which I'll hit you the website so that you can order that, because we have a fabric jam of all cats. And I'm sure your daughter would love for you to make her a little dress, or maybe a headband or scarf out of this cat fabric, which is super cute. So all of the proceeds from these 3 initiatives will go to supporting female and non-binary comic book retailers. Right now, we've got 28 of them. Our list is growing because there are so many people whose shops are not even up and running yet. And so this money will help them. So I encourage all of your listeners and your fans and your readers, your friends and family, if you've got $10, please share, please donate. We appreciate it. We thank you. And again, Ryan, it's so amazing to finally meet you.
Same here.
I cannot thank you enough for your support. I think you have excellent taste in comics.
Thank you.
Not just because you follow me, but because also what you said about Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor, because they are the coolest people in comics. And
I agree.
I hope we can connect again. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much.
No problem. Enjoy the weekend.